TikTok is powerful and dangerous for the same reasons that Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat are dangerous. And that's because they have a massive amount of power over what we see and what information we consume. This is a battle for what the internet will be used for. And in our capitalist system, where we have tech giants, and those tech giants have so much control over us, those tech giants are going to be the big prizes in that fight.
This is The Rip Current. I'm Jake Ward. Every week we look at the big invisible forces that have us in their grasp, and we speak to experts in those forces. TikTok, you guys, is just like any other social media platform. It's just trying to figure out what you want and algorithmically serve you that in an insatiable package, a package you cannot resist. The difference, of course, is it's Chinese-owned. And so in Emily Baker White's book, Every Screen on the Planet, The War Over TikTok, which is out this month, she describes the growth of this company in terms that will be very familiar to American readers. It is a throw spaghetti at the wall, slightly socially awkward and very smart techno-utopian dudes trying to build a system that will predict everyday people's tastes and serve up content they can't get enough of. But the difference, of course, is it's being a Chinese company. And being a Chinese company means it is beholden to all sorts of cultural values and legal problems that don't face other companies. And it also happens to be the very first time that China managed to export a big culture-shaping product to the United States. That's why, at the crossroads of this, you have the CEO of the company, Chu Zhou, both, testifying before senators and hosting the Met Gala on the same trip. What Emily Baker White argues here is that this platform is truly the future of the internet, not just in the sense of the product that it is, but the fight over it is a prediction, is a look into the future at the fight we are all going to have about what we want the internet to be. Is it a free and open place to, gather up ideas and form community? Or is it something that has to be fought over the way that governments fight over land? It's that fight and the very powerful but very careless company at the center of that fight that forms the bulk of this book. And I hope you enjoyed this, what I considered a very interesting hour-long conversation with Emily Baker White. Emily Baker White, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So this book really spoke to me on many, many levels. And I have to say that as a journalist, a book like this, on my beat, brings up a certain amount of PTSD, right? Like there's like, here's the congressional testimony. I remember that day I had to deal with that. And like, here's this thing. But one thing that I am really astounded by in this is how well sourced you are, and I want to pay homage first to just how hard that is. And maybe you could tell people a little bit about it. I had an NBC person once say to me, when I was first interviewing for the job, we're really well sourced in the Pentagon, but we have trouble, getting into Silicon Valley. And I was trying to explain to that person that it's way harder than the Pentagon. The Pentagon's full of people who are underpaid and hate their boss, but I find tech people to be very hard to get sourced with, because so much of the time they are true believers, they're well paid. It's very, very difficult. So tell me a little bit about, just first of all, like how did you get as well sourced on this beat as you did?
It's so interesting that you asked that, and so interesting how you set up the question, because I do think I was one of the first people to sort of go deep within TikTok and start talking to a lot of people. And better than most that like often sourcing begets sourcing. If you start down a path and there are other people that have thoughts on a topic and you start writing about that topic, they'll sort of come to you. And I definitely feel like I was the beneficiary of that in a way. I think
when you
people,
just to ask, so yeah. when you publish a thing,
yeah.
whether it's Forbes or wherever you were working at that time, that tends to set it off. Somebody within that organization reads it and says, this is someone I'd like to speak to you about it. Is that right?
Totally. And so just to give an example here. The first story I wrote about TikTok was a story I wrote when I was at BuzzFeed News, and it was about the existence of something called Project Texas. Project Texas was TikTok's sort of internal answer to all of the concerns about it being a national security threat. And the story that I wrote for BuzzFeed, the first one, didn't get a ton of traction. Not that many people read it. It was interesting. It was sort of like, hey, TikTok acknowledges there's this issue and they're trying to move some data around and set up some new protections. But it was after that story that a person approached me and said, oh, actually, I have a lot more information about Project Texas that you're going to be interested in. And I got onto that person's radar because they were like, oh, someone's writing about Project Texas, right? And so I think sometimes when you write a story about a thing and it's interesting, but it's not, a total bombshell, someone else will come to you and be like, oh, we have so much more to tell you about this thing that can then turn into an entire beat or a run of stories that ends up defining your life.
I have often found that inside the industry, it is a sort of weird kind of almost corrective, mansplaining kind of impulse that brings people out. And maybe you get that more than I do, but people will come to you and say, you got this one a little wrong. Let me tell you, let me sort of clear it up for you. And by virtue of that, you get into a much longer conversation than they probably ever intended.
There's definitely that. You definitely get mansplaining. You definitely get a lot of people who both think they know a lot about a thing and people who actually know a lot about a thing. And sometimes those are the same people, and sometimes they're like half the same people. And so while there are definitely mansplainers, I'm always really eager to hear what people, especially with people with inside information, thought about a story, because if people are eager to tell you their thoughts about that story, they may be eager to tell you about something else that you don't know about that you really do want to look into. And so every insider with an opinion about a story is an opportunity as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's get into the book here. So the book is The War Over TikTok, Every Screen on the Planet is the title. And the first passage here that jumped out at me had to do with the sort of psychological origins of the app, of ByteDance specifically, right? So ByteDance, the parent company, for anybody who doesn't know, right, owns many, many companies, TikTok being one of them. And I don't even know that I'm saying this name right. Zhang Yiming, am I right?
That's how I say it. I hope it's right.
Zhang
Yeah,
Yiming.
I think that's right.
So founder and CEO of ByteDance. You talk about his early days wanting to create stuff. And you do such a smart job of encapsulating some of the stuff that sort of describes his personality and his attitude toward other people. And I want to read a little tiny bit of it here. So he, for instance, sounds to me like a very quiet, not very social, very cerebral guy who, according to a Chinese language blog that you quote here, he described, he once watched one of the Twilight movies with his family members and dissected it later on social media, studying its psychological effects on its audience. Quote, satisfying the psychological needs of users is user experience, he allegedly posted. And then he told a magazine about his particular psychological needs, which you describe as being different from most people's. Quote, a small number of elites pursue efficiency and realize self-awareness, and they live in reality, he said. He thought most people, this is you writing, he thought most people, though, would fall prey to vice to some degree, whether that meant drinking, gambling, or some other form of indulgence. And what is incredible to me, as someone who is regularly told by a video on TikTok that I should go to bed and stop scrolling, right? That this guy seems to have had in mind this kind of Romulan perspective on human behavior and decided to build a whole industry, a whole corporation out of analyzing that stuff. And yet he seems to take such a dim view of the very behavior that seems to have made his stuff so powerful. Like, talk a little bit about the origin of this place and what you understand about him.
So he's definitely, I would agree, he is a quiet, cerebral guy who, he has a sort of fascination with delayed gratification. He used to talk and post tons about delayed gratification. Everything was about delayed gratification. And sort of very much a too marshmallow guy. Like, there's all of this vice out there in the world, and those of us who are strongest will learn to master it, learn to understand it. And I think, there's definitely an irony here. Like, the person who is so interested in mastering that in himself and sort of analyzing it in the world is also someone who's built something that a lot of people would refer to as an addiction machine, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence that happened. I also don't think he necessarily set out to build something evil or terrible. I think he genuinely believes, and there's, stuff in the book about this too, he wanted to make it more efficient for information to reach people. And he sort of talked about a reversal between the search paradigm that we've all been living in. You want to know something, you go onto the internet and you search for it. And replacing that with the sort of recommendations paradigm that we've been more recently living in, where you don't know that you want a piece of information, but the algorithm knows enough about you that it knows that you want to see it. And so information looking for people instead of people looking for information, in his mind, was ultimately a sort of higher, more efficient plane of information distribution. And I think that's an interesting and fraught idea.
Yeah. I mean, and as you describe and as we were all sort of looking at it in retrospect, they threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall. Both he did and people around him, right, to try and capitalize on this.
They still do. ByteDance is famous for throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think that's
interesting.
The scientific method in action here.
That's right. So tell us about the kind of rough draft early stabs at trying to capture this kind of user behavior. And then let's talk a little bit about the current culture of spaghetti throwing.
Yeah, so talking to staff about this is super funny. They're always they would sort of say, "Oh my God, then they launched this thing and then they launched that thing," and some of them would last like 3 weeks. It wouldn't like. One that sticks out to me is for a very brief period they had an app called LARF, which was an abbreviation, laugh at really funny, and it was just like sort of random memes that like went viral. And this is not something that was around for more than a couple months. It never really got traction, but it was yet another app through which they could deliver some genre of content to people that like might catch on.
Yeah.
And they were very willing.
That doesn't sound that far from TikTok. Like that's in the ballpark.
Yes, right. That's in the ballpark. They also, of course, acquired both Flipagram and Musical.ly, two lip syncing apps that were popular in the United States, and then they ultimately sort of retooled Musical.ly and relaunched it as TikTok. But they tried all kinds of things. There was a trivia, like an HQ trivia type of thing within the early TikTok or maybe that was within Top Buzz for a while. There was something called Buzz Video. Again, this was virally entertaining, mostly video, short video content. They did have text-based apps, sort of Twitter clones too, but they had the video and they just needed to disseminate it in a way that it was going to catch on. And they sort of tried a lot of permutations of doing that before TikTok ultimately stuck.
I feel like it's in the kind of rewritten history of a lot of these companies that there was this sort of foregone conclusion that somehow it would work, or that, we had a master plan and we executed that plan. But what you've described here is a place that was, it turns out all these people kind of backed into their success. But this place almost more than most. They just kept throwing spaghetti until something stuck.
Yeah, backed into or just like brute forced into. I don't know if this is one of your next questions, but when we talk about how they actually acquired users, they spent a whole lot of money on advertising. They spent a whole lot of money to acquire users. And in fact, the purchases of Flipagram and Musical.ly were largely user acquisition purchases, right? The benefit of buying these apps and then sort of retooling them as TikTok is that people already had the apps on their phones. They already knew the apps. They trusted the apps. They had like networks on the apps. And so it's really hard to come in as a new Chinese company and say, hi, you want to download our app. It's much easier to acquire an app they're already using and then sort of make it into whatever it is you want to make it.
Yeah, right. You then talk about in that process there being a moment where, as they try to move into new territories, like in this case South America, they're in a place where they have to create the impression that they are the zeitgeist, that they are just the raw feed of what everyone is interested in and what's hot and what's not. But as you point out, there are specific people, a team in this case of like a handful of people, making the early decisions about what's going to work and what's hot and what's not. And you actually refer to it as, I think it's actually called heating, right? That you heat content to make it go. And you actually name for Latin American users a guy named Jorge. Tell us that story about like how it just, because again, it feels like it's this sort of natural zeitgeist progression, but it's a totally engineered experience. And you really land on like the names of some of the people who are doing this. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So a note on heating. That's actually TikTok's internal name for that tool. That's not a thing I called it. That's the thing that they called it, which was just really fun when I learned about it, because it's there's a little button, there's a little fire, and you can heat the content. And it's just like, it's very easy for those of us who don't work at TikTok to understand how that would work. To talk a little bit about Jorge, and there were many others like him sort of across the world. He was a young, hip, cool guy who was sort of, internet forward, understood what people liked to see on the internet. And he was hired by ByteDance as a curator, like many people were in the United States and, the Middle East and North Africa, everywhere, to help ByteDance to help TikTok figure out what to promote to users. And his most important student, as I say it in the book, was the algorithm itself, right? Because it's hard to imagine now, but initially the TikTok algorithm was kind of janky. Sure. It would serve you videos that are 2 seconds long. It would serve you videos that are really blurry. It would serve you videos that are in a dialect that you can't understand, right? And that was a bad user experience. And people would this isn't a good app. I don't like what's on this app, right? Whereas if you had local curators deciding, oh, this is really funny. Oh, this is, particularly weird and appeals to this group of people. And I don't think you totally have to overthink it. This is about to be the song of the summer. Let's go here, right? You had people who were culturally competent, who understood the user base for their area, helping figure out what was gonna pop off in their area. And this wasn't super controversial content. It wasn't controversial content at all. It was a funny cooking video. When you think about the guy riding the skateboard with the juice, right? There are these virally gripping, funny things. And we often think about those as things that were magically discovered by the algorithm. And some of them were. But a lot of them weren't. A lot of them were a 23-year-old curator sitting in an office being like, oh my God, this one, right? And then that person gives something a little juice. Say that person gives 10 things a little juice, and then 3 of them then get a lot of organic engagement on top of that, right? And yeah, I talk about this speech given by a former FTC commissioner in the book, where she talks about algorithms. And she says that when someone says algorithm, just take the word algorithm out and replace it with a guy named Bob. Because algorithms are made by humans. They're made by humans to reflect what humans want to have happen. And so if a human shouldn't be doing it, if it's shady for a human to do it, then it's shady for an algorithm to do it. And I think that's additionally useful when we think about these curators who were training the TikTok algorithm. The TikTok algorithm isn't some magic thing that was just born. A bunch of humans decided to tweak it in all kinds of ways to make it stickier, to make it more interesting, right? And it is the product of human decisions. And I think it's just with something that feels as magic as TikTok, it's extra important for us to say, yeah, okay, that's the amalgamation of a lot of intelligent humans thinking about how to make this thing work.
When we come back, we're going to talk about what makes TikTok special in geopolitical terms, and that has to do with it being a specifically Chinese company. We'll talk about that. Stay with us. China is, of course, the distinguishing characteristic of this platform. Aside from its, everything that you have described about it so far, the algorithmic power of it, the fact that it's an engineered thing, that it's preying on human instincts,